Self-injurious with reckless self-abandon. The amazing spider talk. The amazing spider talk. Come swing through the air, sit back and prepare for the amazing spider talk.
All right, we are live now. Hello, world. My name is Dan Gvozden, and I am joined by my co-host over to my right.
Is it your right?
Is it your right?
Yes.
Yes.
I guess.
I don't know. It's hard to tell. I'm Mark Ginocchio, guys. How are you?
Doing just fine.
And should I say something?
Yeah,
now?
sure.
I don't have to figure out my lefts and my rights. I'm on the bottom.
Yes,
Hi, I'm Xavier Mendoza and GodzillaMendoza. My YouTube name. Something I came up with when I was 10, but then it got too big and I can't change it now. We're introducing what we're doing right now. So yeah, we're doing a podcast on 80s and 90s, late 80s Spider-Man cartoons. For those in my audience who haven't really heard of Amazing Spider Talk before, they're flat out the best Spider-Man podcast. I've been listening to them for a long time, and they have a lot of really great guests on, and then me. I'm hosting them here on the channel because I thought it would be cool to get maybe a few extra years on this one, and they're also in turn having me on their show. So yeah. Yeah,
and we're live, so we're hearing an echo right now, which means I got to figure that out really quickly. So everybody bear with us for a second as we get the tech kind of figured out. So Xavier and Mark, are you hearing an echo from me?
No.
And you guys, I am hearing an echo from you. So let me figure out what is going on.
Gotta love streaming.
Gotta love streaming. Yeah. We're going to go live. The show will start in about 4 minutes, so I apologize about this. We haven't had an echo before, so we're going to figure this out. Both of you, are you guys fully on your headsets?
Correct.
Okay, no external audio. All right, why are we getting an echo? All right. Can you guys speak for me for a second?
Should I go first?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. I will just awkwardly stumble and mumble and stutter until, which hasn't happened yet. So I'm assuming I should keep talking.
I know what it is. I think I have it fixed now. Can you guys both speak for me?
All right, cool.
I'll go next. Hey, Dan, did you get it fixed or what?
I believe it's fixed. Xavier?
All right.
Should we do that improv thing where I just say one word and then he says another word and then we build a story out of it?
There we go. We got it fixed. So, all right, before the show goes live, those who are watching this on the Amazing Spider Talk YouTube channel, Xavier is a really amazing, video essayist on YouTube. Is that how you would describe yourself, Xavier?
Yeah, a little bit of video essays, a little bit of just flat out reviews. I also do cosplay tutorials. So if you ever want to learn how to sew a Spider-Man costume from scratch, I can teach you. And occasionally streaming, just a lot of stuff, but usually in the realm of comics.
Absolutely. So, like, one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on the show, Xavier, and we could talk about this when the show gets started, is that you do a lot of great videos on animated shows. A lot of them being Spider-Man shows. There's been an ongoing joke on your channel that you're not a Spider-Man channel, and here we are proving it wrong again. But
because what that whole thing was is that I got kind of my start doing this big retrospective look back at review series of all of the Spider-Man video games, and like that just kind of hit some kind of hidden niche around the time and like got a lot of attention. And I've just gotten nothing but requests to do more Spider-Man content ever since then, even though I just like general comic book things. So I've always been like, well, I'm not explicitly just a Spider-Man channel, but like anytime I do talk about him, everyone always kind of harasses me about it in a weird way, because they're always bringing back that "not a Spider-Man channel" quote to kind of to poke fun at me. But I don't mind it. It's funny. It's all in good. It's all in jest.
Well, very cool. Very cool. For those who are in the chat, hang out after the show. I mean, this is a podcast that has a live show portion, so you're going to maybe be a little bit confused to get started, but it will all make sense, I promise. After the show, we're going to be answering your questions from the chat. So hang around till the show's completed, and you can hang out with us for a little bit of a live stream hangout, and we'll answer your questions about comics, about animated series. We're really excited about that. So, you guys ready? Should we get the show started?
But Dan, except for Bob Dole, we're not answering his questions.
Right. We don't want the Bob Dole guy chiming in. So is everybody ready to go? Xavier, Mark?
Yeah, I suppose so.
All right, here we go.
Let's have a show, Dan.
Let's get the show started. Every time I open a comic book and read from panel to panel, it allows for my imagination to fill in the gutter with spectacular movement that transforms simple lines and colors into vivid playgrounds for my imagination. With a character like Spider-Man, that means imagining him flipping around New York City, street corners on a web, landing a sweet sucker punch on a snarling villain, and helping his frail Aunt May cross the street.
In translating Spider-Man to early animation, no longer do we have to imagine these movements anymore. In the late 60s, Spider-Man burst onto television screens in bright colors with a catchy theme song, but admittedly limited animations. In the 1970s, he squared off against corporate villains and high-rises in live action. But it wasn't until the early 80s that we began to see his true potential on the small screen in animated shows like 1981's Spider-Man and its sequel, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gvozden, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which I think definitely count.
And I'm mischievous Mark Ginocchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, but the annuals don't count.
Welcome to the 4th season of the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe.
If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app. Every other week, we put out a mainline episode of our flagship show, and sprinkled in between, we review new comics, as well as interview some of the greatest Spider-Man creators of yesterday and today. This is the perfect time to start listening. And Dan, we even have new comics coming up now.
I know. The world is alive again. In this season of the all-new Amazing Spider Talk, we'll be revisiting Spider-Man's adventures in the early 80s, where denim jackets were hip, the villains were forgettable, and the creative voices at Marvel were constantly changing. Sure, Spider-Man comics weren't at their creative zenith, but seemingly nothing could stop Spider-Man's meteoric rise through the pop culture landscape. Part of the ascension came in the form of 2 new cartoon shows that sought to build off the foundations laid by the popular 1960s show. So that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. 1981's Spider-Man and the follow-up series, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
And if you haven't already, check out that awesome artwork commissioned from Nick Cagnetti depicting Spider-Man, Iceman, and Firestar fighting against Dr. Doom. It's great because it's actually a recreation of the legendary John Romita Sr.'s network pitch artwork for Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
That's right, Mark. And if you're watching live, you know what Mark's talking about because you're looking at it right now, because we're also video streaming our show live. Every other Sunday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Tune in on YouTube as we talk and record Amazing Spider Talk live. Plus, Mark and I are going to stick around after the show to interact with the audience and answer your questions live. Just go to Amazing Spider Talk on YouTube, hit subscribe, and be sure to turn on the notifications by clicking on that little bell to be reminded when they go live.
But we couldn't do this alone. I mean, we couldn't. But
no
instead,
way.
Today instead we're bringing in one of our very own amazing friends to help us discuss these shows. Dan, it's great that we get to kind of pop the live cherry with an amazing friend on the Amazing Friends episode, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It makes perfect sense.
Okay, yes. So that amazing friend, of course, is none other than YouTube's own Xavier Mendoza from the GodzillaMendoza channel. Welcome to the show, Xavier.
Hey, it's nice to be here, and I'm really honored to both be on the show on your guys' end and then help, stream it on my channel. For those who don't know about me, I'm just some dorky kid from the U.S. who loves to cosplay, write stories, and read comics. On my own channel, I review comics, games, and animated shows, as well as do cosplay tutorials. So if you ever want to learn how to sew Spider-Man costumes from scratch, I can teach you how to do that. I've also reviewed all of Spider-Man's video games and just a lot of other comic booky stuff, whatever just strikes my fancy at the time. So, hi.
Well, welcome to the show, Xavier. I'm curious. Everybody's got an origin story in terms of Spider-Man. What was the first experience you really had with the character?
I remember it pretty vividly. Is when I was like 3 years old. My parents, when I was like a baby going into a toddler, they just bought me nothing but like Elmo stuff all the time, and just my whole room was entirely covered in Elmo, and that's just what they thought I was into. But I would always go into my dad's office in the other side of the house and see all these Spider-Man posters all over the place, and I was like, "What's that? Who's that guy?" And he would just kind of describe it to me about as well as a little kid could understand. But one day, my mom was actually taking me to the store, and we were just going around shopping, and we were in the pharmacy aisle at a Walmart, and I was just standing up in the shopping cart, and I saw on a shelf a Spider-Man action figure that I think someone had taken to that aisle and then just kind of left there haphazardly. And I grabbed it and was like, "Can I have this?" And she said, "Sure." So I took it home, and that Spider-Man action figure was I still have it to this day, but I just kind of fell in love with the character design, and eventually started asking my dad about what's this character about, what are his stories, and every time I needed new information, he would always just tell me verbally or occasionally show me one of his old comics. And then, my parents themselves have always been into comics. That's why my name is Xavier, is because my mom read a lot of X-Men in the 90s before I was born. And the kind of funny thing about that is when they were trying to figure out what to name me, my dad suggested Godzilla. My mom said no and was like, "How about Xavier instead?" So that's why that ended up being my handle on all of the internet stuff.
That's really cool.
I wonder... I do have to wonder though, was your first bedroom all of the interlocking covers of X-Men 1 as the wallpaper, or what? I mean I just have 90s X-Men, I just have to think.
I actually, my dad, as I started getting older, and I was like, "I don't like Elmo, I like comic books, please put Spider-Man stuff in my room." He decided to get all of his old comics and just kind of line the walls with them. They're all in covers with boards and everything in plastic, but he would tack through the plastic part and kind of have them all lined up around the whole room. So there was just Daredevils and X-Men and Spider-Man and even Lethal Protector Venom books, and just any random day I would just point to one and go, "Tell me what happens in that one," and he would either get it off the wall and show me, or just kind of run it down from memory.
You are both presenting me a better alternative version of what my childhood could be, or what some distant future where I have a kid and I'm subjecting them to the same thing. So it's cool. It's cool to hear this from you.
That's what I think is the coolest thing about comic books as a fandom, is it's very generational. It's something that gets passed down a lot. We all have a different experience with these characters, and we all have different runs that we love, but it's always cool kind of passing down and explaining it to someone else. Because my little sister, there's a pretty big age gap. I'm 8 years older than her, and she's just turned 13, so I'm always explaining this stuff to her. I'm like, "Oh yeah, here's how Venom got his powers," or I would show her episodes of some of the cartoons to just kind of explain stuff quickly, because listening to me ramble about it for 3 hours might not get it across as well as maybe like a 20-minute episode.
Well, very cool. Speaking of, cartoon episodes, let's talk about the topic we're here to talk about. First up, we're going to be talking about Spider-Man from 1981. And I had never seen this show before, and I was so thrilled to have an opportunity to watch this for this show. I guess I'm curious, do any of you have a history with this show prior to us, assigning this to watch?
Honestly, I one of my earliest memories growing up was that my parents, I think they got it from my grandparents, had an old VHS tape that had a bundle of episodes from both shows that I would just kind of watch and rewatch because that was the only thing I really had on at the time. Because there wasn't always, you didn't always get to choose whenever these cartoons would come on TV, but if I wanted to watch Spider-Man, it was probably one of these tapes. So the episodes of Black Cat from the 81 series and maybe a couple of others were definitely ones I remember. And then from Amazing Friends, the X-Men crossover episode was the one that I always watched.
Yeah, similarly, I mean, and this was kind of, I think I mentioned this in the last episode, Dan. I kind of had an inadvertent deja vu moment with this series specifically where I was watching, or I guess now rewatching one of the episodes. It was the one where Dr. Doom had the what do you call it? The bomb under New York City. And I'm watching this and the dialogue from it, all of a sudden starts coming back to me. And I'm I have seen this episode before. Where have I seen this episode? And, Dr. Google was my friend. And I remember there was a VHS compilation of Dr. Doom episodes. So the original 1960s Fantastic Four. And then they decided to stick this episode on as kind of a bonus episode.
Yeah, Dr. Doom got a lot of
there for a second.
Oh, there was just kind of a pause, and I was thinking it was someone else's turn to talk.
Yeah, it might have had the Spidey Captain America episode too, but I couldn't figure that out for certain. But this Dr. Doom episode was definitely on the cassette, and I just was oh man, that's a memory from the Wayback Machine.
I also had a VHS tape with, I think I remember vividly the Amazing Friends episode with the Juggernaut, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And it probably had episodes from this show on, if Xavier's memory is correct. But that was the one that really stood out in my mind. So for me, this was kind of a brand new experience of this show. So let's talk about it. Spider-Man from 1981. It was very short-lived. Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about the history of the show?
Well, I guess we can go back to, in 1981, Fritz Freeling. Am I saying that name right, Dan? Freeling?
I believe so, yeah.
Or is your guess as good as mine? Okay. So he left the company he founded, DePatie Freeling Enterprises, to resume his former job with Warner Brothers Animation, and that sparked the sale of the company to Cadence Industries, which also owned Marvel Comics Group. So it was renamed Marvel Productions, and the company decided to use Spider-Man as kind of one of their launch programs as a way to attract network attention to Marvel's other properties and potentially bring them to television. Spider-Man was always kind of the linchpin for expanding the brand of Marvel. This DePatie Freeling Enterprises, their previous work with Marvel was 1978's Fantastic Four show, which is probably best known for the fact that it did not have the Human Torch in it.
Yeah,
it said it was Herbie or
Herbie the robot.
Yeah, great choice, I guess. And then they also did a Spider-Woman show. Which we'll probably get into later in the season, spoiler alert, when we talk about Spider-Woman, in terms of, Marvel trying to get some branding in on Spider-Woman. So they created a comic and a animated series about that.
Have you guys ever seen either of those shows? I mean, the Spider-Woman was just added to Disney Plus, and I think it's the first time it's been commercially available ever. And so I decided to check it out, and I checked it out, and then I checked out. because I just was not interested in it. It was very strange and not that great.
I kind of skimmed through it a little bit. I turned it on kind of out of curiosity because I was like, is Spider-Man going to be in this? I feel like they wouldn't let this character stand on her own. She would have to be like introduced via him. And then I was right. And then in the first episode, he plays kind of a part. But I don't know. I wasn't paying too much attention to it. There was some weird plot about them going to Egypt. And there was magic. And there was mummies, I think. So
I feel like they're bound.
Spider-Man story.
They're bound to repeat all the mistakes the comics made when Spider-Man was first introduced. It's like, what kind of villains work with Spider-Man? Oh, of course, aliens. You know, and that would all be retconned later. You know, I feel like the TV shows just repeat these kind of strange errors over and over again until they find their groove.
Yeah. I never saw the Spider-Woman show, but I definitely have vague memories of that Fantastic Four show because I do remember Herbie. But like, again, this was probably years and years ago, and I couldn't even tell you the exact context of how I saw that show, but I've not seen it probably since I was like 6 or 7 years old. So that's eons ago, people.
So yeah, so this show, Spider-Man 1981, it first debuted September 12th in 1981, obviously. And, you know, the reason a lot of people haven't seen it is it only ran for 26 episodes, one season, and, you know, ending March in 1982. So like it didn't have a lot of longevity, and, it re-aired a little bit in syndication as part of the Marvel Action Universe animation block, but in the late 80s. But, between 81 and the late 80s, it didn't run, and there really wasn't much familiarity with it. But of course, now you can watch it on Disney Plus. It's all there. And when, they were advertising it as like the Lost show, when they were kind of plugging it on Disney Plus, and I think they're kind of right about it. I mean, it's not been widely viewed.
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly compared to Amazing Friends, which we'll get into the logistics of that in a little bit. But like, I mean, this, when you put the two of them side by side, I mean, they both come out on the same date, but one gets like, the Saturday morning network block, and then this one was just kind of made for syndication and kind of languishes in that like no man's land forever and ever. So that's kind of what, made it.
I think why there's not as much as like nostalgia associated with this one. Like, everyone knows Amazing Friends, everyone knows Iceman because of that show. Like, everyone even brings up Firestar, even though she hasn't really been in anything since then substantially. But like, that one just was on at the right time and had like the right audience for people to remember it and like make jokes about it. It can become like a pop culture reference thing. While as this 81 cartoon is just like, it's just a weird middle child between between Amazing Friends and the 60s cartoon.
It's funny that you say that, and you bring up the pop culture memeability of this, because it's funny watching this through. I realized that like a lot of the memes that I really like from Spider-Man are from this show, and I always figured they were from the 1960s show. And like, I mean, there's like the Spider-Man wearing the like gold helmet, or Spider-Man laying on the train tracks. Like, they're all from this
There's that
show.
Frame from the X-Men crossover where he says, Professor, you're a class act, and does this hand sign and stuff. That was one of the ones that I kept seeing. You can always tell just because of the webs on the costume.
Now, you're a big fan of the 90s cartoon, and I feel like one of the major talking, one of the major blurbs you hear about that show is like, oh, it was subject to censorship and the characters couldn't actually punch each other. And we've had John Semper on the show a number of times, who's the showrunner of that show, and he claims that wasn't true. And I don't know whether you can believe that or not, but I'll take him at his word. But for this show, it actually was true. The characters couldn't punch each other, so they found ways around it, and pretty much every character had laser beams or something like that to make up for that mistake. Or not mistake.
Yeah, real creative with what you could do with webbing.
Yeah.
To make that combat work.
Yeah. So, Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about these, like the way the characters were designed?
Right. So they were done by Rick Hoberg, and they were actually modeled after basically John Romita when he came onto the book. So they kind of undickoized Peter, specifically his haircut. The wardrobe was also kind of more modern. Always with the turtlenecks, right? Which was again a Romita-ism, because Romita kind of theorized that Peter would wear a turtleneck because it would be easier for him to hide his costume that way, which it makes sense, right? I mean,
I've done the hide your costume under the clothes thing. That collar comes up really high.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also just thinking about how warm a turtleneck is, but whatever. I mean, I'm apt to sweat, so
Especially when you're standing next to Firestar. Well, we'll get there.
Exactly.
We'll get there. But it's interesting too, because the costume is actually like a hoodie in this show. Like, he brings it up, and then they make very careful to detail the like hood going over the head. And I'm not exactly sure how that like physically works, but it's a unique design, and they were very proud of it.
I like it, and I think it could work, actually, given a lot of the Zentai suits that I've used to make my own Spidey costumes always have like a front-facing version of that, so you kind of pull it up and back. So having it work the other way, if you just had like some snap buttons in the collar, I think you could pull that off.
Yeah, for sure. What was interesting about the show and why people haven't seen it is, that halfway through the show, they basically found out that like they couldn't secure a network to air it. So they had to kind of come up with another alternative option. And so they added a bunch of gimmicks to the show, which is how we got Amazing Friends. So they had ditched the original concept halfway through the season, finished the season, and then rebooted the show as Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends so that they could ape off of DC's popular Super Friends cartoon at the time. And that's kind of what brought the death to this show, is just that like people didn't want a plain Jane Spider-Man show. I guess you couldn't sell enough toys, which the 1990s Spider-Man show would prove disastrously wrong. So that's why the show has kind of languished in obscurity, because it didn't really get that treatment. And the only time that I've really found that it was really released is, weirdly, it was released in the UK officially under this banner Spider-Man 5000. And I tried to figure out why 5,000, other than the catchiness of everyone's favorite number 5,000. But I couldn't find anything, unless you guys can take a guess why 5,000.
It sounds cool. It sounds futuristic, and it distinguishes it from the 60s cartoon by, just giving it something else, because both of them are just called Spider-Man. So
I mean, maybe it has something to do with that his costume had that many more lines on it than compared to Spider-Man 67. I mean, there's my guess, people.
That's a good guess. So yeah, that's a brief history of the 1981 Spider-Man show. Let's talk general thoughts about the show. We've kind of said a little bit about it, but Xavier, like, watching this through for this episode, what'd you think?
I was actually surprised by how well it seemed to capture like a lot of like hallmarks of Spidey stories, like conflicts you would see in those types of comics around that time. It was like, Peter was out all night fighting crime and then forgot to do his homework, so he gets in trouble at school the next day. Or like he falls asleep with his costume on and Aunt May walks in. Like a lot of like little things that I just consider like what makes Spider-Man different from other superheroes is these kind of minor inconveniences in his personal life from being a superhero. And like the 60s cartoon touched on them a little bit, but this was the one that really like went whole ham with it. And I think that was like really appreciated, because you could just do something like the Japanese like live action show or like the Nicholas Hammond show and just completely throw all of that out and just give him like a bat cave and like have him like driving a spider mobile on a spider plane and whatever toyetic thing. But I think they actually really cared. Like they seemed to get it.
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly, especially when you compare it to other comic book based animated shows at the time, and like you said, the live action show, which kind of went a completely different direction. I mean, yes, granted, this is not, I feel we're spoiled by the Spider-Man 90s show and then some of the subsequent shows in terms of the slickness and of the production values and kind of the intricacies of the plots of these stories. I mean, obviously, each episode here is mostly self-contained. I mean, there's like one kind of overriding thread with Doctor Doom, kind of, although like that thread is just that he wants to be ruler of the world, which is, kind of as insane of a statement as it sounds, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it's not. But I mean, but overall, I feel like this does kind of get at the heart of at least what Spider-Man was in the comics, and in terms of the tone and the humor and these little situations that Xavier was talking about, like the little nuances and the pratfalls of the character, and like, I don't know, like I legitimately enjoyed watching this in its own kind of kitschy way, whereas when we get to Amazing Friends, we'll go into more detail. Where that show just kind of seemed off the wall to me in terms of a concept, although it's clearly the more popular show.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys. I think what's great about this show is it's very Spider-Man. Like it never feels like well, sometimes it does, but mostly it feels like it's a superhero universe and story that are uniquely something that you would tell in a Spider-Man story. It's always kind of bouncing between the supporting cast members and Peter's life and things like that. And it seems like the writers really loved the comics. They just kind of like got it, and they worked in all kinds of little details. The humor is really great. And the way that the episodes are structured is like one of my favorite things. It's always kind of balancing two plots, one that's like Peter Parker's life and one that's Spider-Man's life. And it, does that classic Spider-Man thing where Spider-Man's life ruins whatever's going on for Peter. And very rarely does he get a full-throated win. And to me, that made it seem like, okay, this is like a show actually about Spider-Man. And I really appreciated that. I think the 60s show got it somewhat. And maybe it's just the voice of that show that threw me off, where, that big booming voice. But here, Ted Schwartz, who does the voice here, it's like so on the money. And dare I say it, I think this voice is kind of like the prototypical Spider-Man voice that would kind of define the character moving forward. Like everybody seems to be aping a version of this.
Well, it's no Herbie the Elf, though, Dan. Let's be real here.
No, it's not. Absolutely. Xavier,
sorry.
Xavier, you do some a lot of voiceover stuff. Like, what did you think about the voice in this show?
Oh yeah, I was actually caught off guard because when I went back watching it, I was expecting Dan Gilvezan's voice from Amazing Friends, so I was not expecting to hear something that sounded different and actually. I would say a lot more fitting for the 81 show. Like there's a kind of there's a softness to his voice when he's Peter Parker that I think is really important, that not a lot of shows capture, as he just kind of sounds a lot more timid. But like the sarcasm as Spider-Man when he like kind of the superhero mode, like he kind of does a pretty good job of both without it being very exaggerated like it was in the 60s cartoon. Where he almost in that cartoon he sounded almost like he was trying to be like kind of cowardly as Peter, but no, it's not necessarily that. It's more just a sort of softness. He doesn't seem like a guy you'd expect to throw punches.
It's actually, I feel like, very Romita-esque. Whereas, I mean, not that I feel like Spider-Man 67 is more Ditko, but like, I feel like this whole. It's funny because you don't have MJ and Gwen, which was obviously the hallmark of the Romita comics, but like otherwise this feels very kind of a 60s aesthetic in terms of the cast and the interaction and, like you said, that softness, but obviously with, I guess, an 80s flair. I don't know.
Yeah, I think they wanted it to, there's, like a certain amount of brand synergy where they wanted it to look like what was current, so they were going for that aesthetically, while as the stories are a little bit more classic because if you're gonna pull from stuff, might as well go for the earlier things because it's been around for a while, and you have like a backlog of stories to adapt or at least take inspiration from instead of just waiting for whatever next issue comes out.
I really loved how much the show focuses on New York itself. I mean, you get a lot of the iconic things like the Statue of Liberty and the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, which always sends me for a spin. But like to me, that was like really nice. It really gave it a good kind of sense of place. And the number one place that like I think really brings the show to life is the offices of the Daily Bugle. We do a lot of focusing on that, and I know the 60s cartoon did, but here it feels more alive. We get the first introduction of Robbie Robertson, which, for my money, this is the first on-screen appearance of Robbie Robertson, correct?
I would say so, yeah. I don't remember him from any of the 60s episodes. Granted, I didn't watch all of them, but I definitely skimmed through a pretty big portion of that show for my review of it for the retrospective. But yeah, I think this was the first one, and that may just be kind of like a time period thing a little bit. Is 60s having a character like Robbie might have not, I don't know, been something they were interested in, but around the 80s that wasn't, times had changed.
You can be progressive. You can be progressive in the pages of the comic, but not on screen, is what you're suggesting.
Yeah, because comics were always like this niche thing, but like the cartoons reach a greater audience, so maybe some older mindsets were at play with not including him or having him anywhere. I don't know, but that's purely speculation.
I mean, I think it also might have something to do with the fact. I mean, I don't disagree, Xavier, but I also feel like part of it might be the fact that, I mean, Jonah himself was such a huge part of the show. I mean, he was a huge part of the show in 67, but like, I feel like he was just kind of more of a punchline in 67, where here, I mean, it's more of that meddlesome, troublemaking.
He's driving a lot more stories.
Yeah. Like, I mean, he's really like, I mean, I feel like every episode is Jonah either, not literally creating the scorpion or the human fly, but like that level of meddling in terms of trying to overcome Spider-Man, which is like, kind of makes Jonah almost the main through line as an antagonist in this show, beyond Doctor Doom.
I would say he's almost more of the antagonist than Doctor Doom, but
yeah, right. But that old chestnut that we always talk about is Jonah. Well, he's an antagonist, but is he a villain? I mean, you know what I mean? It's that whole thing. I mean, he's a thorn in his side for sure. And then, anyone who brings Mortimer, the nephew, in is just no good to me. I mean, Mortimer, we should just rename Cousin Oliver, in my opinion. He is the Cousin Oliver of the Spider-Man animated series.
Yeah, what Mark's talking about is there's a character, Mortimer, who's Jonah's nephew that's introduced in the show that I've never seen in any other medium. And he's barely in the show. He's probably in 4 or 5 episodes overall.
Yeah, I mean, he just shows up to be like, I'll do it, Uncle Jonah. And then, then that's that.
He's kind of like he's like a Ned Leeds, but they wanted Betty to date Peter. So I guess they didn't want that triangle thing going on because he's kind of competitive with Peter to be like the top photographer for the Bugle.
Right, but he just can't get those pictures of Spider-Man because no one can get those pictures of Spider-Man.
No. And a shout out to William Woodson, who does the voice of Jonah. He's got I couldn't nail down what region of the world accent he's got in this. It's like somewhat European. It's interesting, but curiously, this show was competing with DC's Super Friends show, and William Woodson did both the narration on that show and the voice of Jonah on this show. So this guy was dipping into both ponds, and whatever. That seems Jamesonian.
Really fitting for Jonah, in spite of the kind of all over the place accent. He just for some reason the tone and the delivery still felt like kind of what I imagined Jonah to sound like. So it wasn't distracting, honestly.
Yeah. One of the things that distracted me, though, is how Spider-Man's webs are utilized in this show. It's it's like Green Lantern levels of absurd. He could be like, I want a table, and boom, 2 seconds later, there's a web table or web hammock
where he actually makes a shovel, a functioning shovel out of webs, and starts scooping dirt, and then pulls just a cup out of nowhere, and then puts like some like rocks in it, like these Mars rocks that Sandman stole, and then covers it with webs on the lid. And how did he? I have no idea how any of this stuff came to be or how he did it so quickly.
Well, hold on. If I can make a shovel out of twigs in Animal Crossing, he can make a shovel out of webbing in this show, okay? Like, I believe in Spider-Man.
He even made the web wings and, like, actually he glides around with them a little bit.
Yeah,
That's
I think
cool.
like in early episodes. Yeah. The other thing that like drives me nuts on this show is the musical score. It's like clear their budget like covered maybe 2 songs, and one of them was the theme.
One of them is also like it's like a variation on like the Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer due. Like it's like at the beginning of every episode, like this like kind of like interlude, elevator of it, and I'm just like, stop playing that song.
It's not meant to be binged because this musical score just like drills into your brain. Like I could hum it for you right now. I'm going to spare everybody that, but like it's a lot. And by a lot, I mean it's too little.
It's like
that's one of those things that works better week to week because you're not thinking about it as much.
It's like an earworm if the worm was a murder hornet. Throw him back.
So speaking of murder, the main villain, Mark, you were saying earlier is it was like kind of Dr. Doom throughout the whole season, and I was surprised by this.
Well, I mean, you're surprised by this, but keep in mind it's 1981, and Dan, what is the biggest thing in pop culture in 1981?
Star Wars or The Empire Strikes Back. I mean, I'm surprised that we didn't get like the Imperial March backing up Dr. Doom here, but that will require them to make more music for the show, and that's not happening anytime soon.
And I mean, is it my imagination or like in Dr. Doom's first appearance, like when I'm like listening to this for the first, I was actually on the treadmill running when I was watching this episode for the first time.
That's how I watched all these episodes.
Oh, there you go. Okay. I'm glad I'm not the only one, but I'm like saying to myself, holy crap, did they actually get James Earl Jones to do this? Like it sounded so much like Vader. And then I feel like as the show went on, they kind of like backed off that a little bit, like they gave him a little less baritone, but I was just like, whoa, they are just like leaning so far into Vader here. It's nuts.
There's even an episode of Amazing.
It's weird how much he's in this show.
There's even an episode of Amazing Friends where they're fighting Doom and the robots are basically like a bunch of Darth Vaders with lightsabers. Like they look identical to Darth Vader and they have green glowing lightsabers that Spider-Man catches at one point and waves around. And he's like, how do you use one of these things? And it's like, oh my God, Star Wars has just straight up invaded this.
I mean, it's all Star Wars, but then it's like everyone from Latveria is like basically from like the communist bloc. So like, I guess they're like, like also leaning into the Cold War. It's like Boris and Natasha basically are like the citizens of Latveria, which I thought was kind of crazy.
And all of those stories are like giant world-spanning arcs. Like nothing can be small with Doom. It's got to be master of the universe, master of the planet. He goes to the UN and like screams for fealty. I mean, the show is just obsessed with him. We even get like a whole episode about his origin. And I think Spider-Man's in the episode for like 30 seconds. And the rest of it is just like, how did Dr. Doom become Dr. Doom? I'm not even exaggerating. He's barely in the episode.
Yeah, I mean,
it's also like he's in the intro more than any other villain in the whole show. He shows up like I think 6 or 7 shots of him compared to like maybe like 3 or 4 of Green Goblin.
Yeah, it's a little odd, especially when you consider the companion show to this, which when we talk about it, only doesn't. I think they featured Doom once, which is kind of weird. Like if he was such a big thing, why wouldn't they find a way to use him with Amazing Friends? But I mean. Who knows? And like, again, like not to, like, I know we talk about this in the comic stand and how this kind of drives you nuts, but like, again, given the scope of like some of Doom's plans here, like literal world domination, like, and we've already established like there are crossover episodes with Captain America, with Namor, Khazar, no Fantastic Four, but like why wouldn't like other Marvel heroes kind of be brought in and be like, whoa, like Spider-Man, we got your back here. It's not just you against this guy who's literally taking over. Like the UN is like, okay, you win, Doom, you own the world now. And I'm like, wait, like you telling me like Cap and Iron Man are just like, yeah, he's all yours, Spider-Man.
All right.
We're sitting this one out.
What's curious about the Doom stuff is like, the first episode with him is him like going to the UN and like I said, asking everybody to join him, or he kind of brainwashes everybody, which sounds vaguely familiar. But, what's cool about it is if you've read the Spider-Man newspaper strip, that's kind of the first thing that he fights in the newspaper strip. Is like his first villain is Doom, and that exact plot plays out as the UN thing. So again, like, it's not so far into Spider-Man. Like, these guys were fans not just of the comic, but of the newspaper strip, and they worked that into this. So, like, there is some precedence for this, and they clearly like that story because
it's weird seeing what stuff they end up taking as inspiration, because it's like completely random sometimes.
Yeah, it does seem random. Like, oh, well, it's like a toy or some other thing. They also kind of bend to pop culture kind of things. Like, there's a lot of like arcade stuff in Amazing Friends that starts popping up, but yeah.
We did get some other classic villains though, like that we would associate with Spider-Man. Like you have Lizard, Kraven the Hunter, Sadman, Mysterio, Kingpin, Vulture, and Green Goblin. And I really liked the Green Goblin episode a lot because I felt like this one, and again, compared to Amazing Friends, kind of leans in more into the actual comic book origin and regarding Norman Osborn, and kind of like, especially like Norman's amnesia about Green Goblin, which
it's cool seeing that because the 60s cartoon didn't know who Osborn was by that point. So every time you see him, he has no secret identity.
Exactly. So I enjoyed at least the portrayal of that. I mean, Kraven is kind of ridiculous in this show, and of course that's also the Khazar episode, which is just overall like bonkers. But like Lizard, Sandman, Mysterio, I mean like these mostly feel pretty true again to these characters. And Doc Ock is the first villain, kind of similar to 67. He was the first villain. There were some new villains too, Dan. I know that you're fans of all of them, right?
Absolutely. I did want to mention that the Kraven Khazar episode is interesting because it's kind of a retelling of the Kraven Gog story down in the Savage Land from Amazing Spider-Man 102. So that's pretty neat. So that's cool.
And we would never hear of Gog again.
No.
Oh boy.
Stay tuned for the Patreon episode. No, sorry.
But yeah, another thing that's interesting to note is like the Black Cat shows up in this series, and like this is like what a couple months or a year after she was introduced in the comics. Like it was like immediately from the comics to the screen, and she's fully formed. And what's interesting about all the villains in this show, like the main Spider-Man villains, is they don't really tell you their backstory except for like Norman, because I think they kind of like expected you to have seen the 60s show. But like Black Cat, they give like the
almost makes me wonder, did they intend for that to be in continuity with this one?
It seems that way in some aspects. They kind of lean.
There's a couple of contradictions, I think, somewhere around there, but like just the fact that like Betty and Jonah are like the only people, at the Bugle in both shows, and like there's no other love interests. It kind of makes you wonder.
Yeah, 100%.
It feels more like a sequel for sure. Yeah, I mean, this feels more like a sequel than Amazing Friends being a sequel to this, I would say.
Yeah, that is very accurate for sure. There were a ton of great voice actors on the show playing these kind of infamous characters. So like the Red Skull was voiced by Peter Cullen, who did Optimus Prime and Eeyore. The Lizard, interestingly enough, and I could not get this out of my head when I was watching the show, is voiced by Corey Burton, who did Captain Hook in the Disney Peter Pan. And every time he talked, that's all I could hear was Captain Hook. The Vulture is Don Messick, who did the voice of Scooby-Doo and Bam Bam and a whole other host of Hanna-Barbera characters. And most interestingly, Neil Ross, speaking of the Goblin, he played the Green Goblin here, both Norman and the Green Goblin. And he would later reprise that role not only in Amazing Friends, although there he only played the Green Goblin, But in the 1994 Spider-Man the Animated Series, he played Norman and the Green Goblin again. So there's some kind of like voice continuity across like 15 years of Spider-Man cartoons.
I also really appreciate his range because there's some scenes in like a couple of the different cartoons where he's both 81 and I think the 90s show where he's going back and forth between the Norman and like Goblin voice like mid-sentence, and it's like really impressive how different they sound from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Green Goblin, famous villain. We all love the Green Goblin, but there's a lot of like really bizarre new villains that are introduced in the show, such as Goron, Stuntman, and his Triangle of Evil. You gotta have a triangle of evil. It's better than the square of evil. There's the Sidewinder, who is this. It's hard to describe. He's like a man in a suit with like a face mask that looks like some kind of like Hauzu monster and a top hat, and he rides around on a Pegasus with like a group of bandits who also have Pegasuses, and I believe they joust Spider-Man at some point. I don't know what is up with this design, but Sidewinder.
That's a lot to take in.
I'm just getting over the fact that you just pluralized Pegasuses.
Is it Pegasi?
Anyway.
Pegasi?
Proceed, Dan. Proceed. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It just distracted
A murder of Pegasus.
Sidewinder. He would never reappear again, and I think for good reason. There's the Gadgeteer.
God. He's
like this like purple dressed balding. I say that fondly as a bald man himself. Balding like janitor who decides to like get in like a purple onesie with like a face mask and rob everybody. I don't know why it wasn't just the Tinkerer, but okay, the Gadgeteer. There's Professor Gizmo, and then there's Nephilia, who is this like he wants Spider-Man's powers, but he ends up turning himself into a man spider, which like I guess this is the first appearance of a man spider. And then because they couldn't use the burglar, they brought in, the burglar that killed Uncle Ben. They brought in the burglar's cousin, which fine. Great.
And yet they couldn't reveal Mortimer as a villain, which just really upsets me.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So, makes me wonder if like the reason for all the original villains, like much like the 60s cartoon, is did they have to... Because like these days, it's usually like the character rights are kind of bundled together. You get Spider-Man, you get his villains. But back then, I feel like it was more of like a case-by-case basis. So they had to purchase the license for every individual character or something. Like, and maybe it was just easier to sometimes throw in some random, just something like a guy riding a Pegasus just to fill for an episode because they couldn't afford someone like Tinkerer or something.
I don't know. But...
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, but the thing is, like, is there anyone from, this era of rogues that, is truly missing? I can't think of someone where I'm like, I guess there's no Electro episode.
Or the
right?
Rhino.
There was an Amazing Friends.
Yeah.
Right,
but
right.
Like, not in 81.
Yeah, that's what I'm just saying. Like, I mean, like, it's
They
not
got
like
all the big ones.
Yeah, it's not like they're coming at the expense of some, like, I mean, we even get a Magneto episode, which is kind of cool, too. But yeah, I mean, you always got to wonder, are they just trying to see, like, if they can hit on something? I think also, there might also, without having the creators on, we can't verify, but it's like, I'm sure there's some fun if you're working on a Spider-Man property, like, oh, I want to be able to create the next Spider-Man villain. You know what I mean? Like, this is a character, obviously.
There's a lot of people who want to, I mean, even though it hadn't been done yet, but a lot of people wanting to do, like, kind of like the Harley Quinn or X-23 thing is, like, I want to contribute a character that, will eventually be brought into the comics. That could also be an explanation. I mean, that's, like, what happened with, like, Batgirl in the 60s Batman show, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Well, we're all just dying for a Sidewinder issue of Amazing Spider-Man. It's coming.
Oh,
it's
boy,
coming.
I'd love a whole action figure of that guy.
I mean, Dan Slott could probably deliver it, Dan. So careful what you ask for, okay?
Yeah, 100%. So, like, the last thing to really talk about here is Peter's love life. I mean, it's not that fleshed out, but it's more than it was in the 60s. And, they went with Betty here, which I think, as far as I can tell, is this the only one where Betty is presented as his love in an animated show?
Well, 67.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
Was she? Oh, then I'm totally forgetting that.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. She was the main female counterpart, I guess, for that one. Because like the others, I don't think the others even like existed yet. Maybe.
Yeah. But it's odd to me that like so she's there, but like MJ and Gwen are not. And okay, I can understand maybe not wanting to bring Gwen in because then like how do you explain that she's dead in the comics? But no MJ. And if you want to say, well, MJ was basically written out by this point, but Betty Brant was like married to Ned Leeds, and like Peter being with her was like having an affair in the comics at this point. So like I like, and again, like they're dating, but it's not like I never get the sense that they're this like truly like long-standing relationship. It's kind of more of just a fling. And I don't know, like I'm a sucker for Peter having a love life, whether it's never going good for him, but like I don't know, I feel
something.
Like I want something more than this, and I feel like that's
I don't know.
Kind of
I was okay with it in a couple of places. Like there was the whole there was the Black Cat episode where she asks him to go out on a date, and he takes Betty Brant to like some live show, but he has to sneak out as Spider-Man because he's also the guest on this show. So he's like, hold on, I'll be right back. I just gotta go to the bathroom. And then Spider-Man swings in. She's like, that Peter's missing it. This is so cool. And like by the end of that episode, she's so mad at him for bailing that she ends up like kind of jokingly taking Jonah out for a date while Peter is just like, damn it, I can't do both. And like I kind of appreciated that it ended with him not having a win necessarily. Like, he caught the Black Cat, he beat the bad guy and saved the day as Spider-Man, but then he gets back into Peter Parker outfit and then just gets kind of like a little bit of a middle finger, and that's just like I said, that feels very on brand for the character. At least for the early stuff before the actual relationships started, going on for longer than that kind of scenario.
Well, very cool. We're going to move on, and each of us is going to share an episode that we recommend or think is special in some way. So we're going to go in order that they were released. So that makes you up first, Xavier. You're talking about an episode. Tell us which one you chose.
I chose The Sandman is Coming. I actually thought that episode was it impressed me particularly because I felt like it had like everything that I specifically look for in Spider-Man stories. Like, I like, the mechanics of having to deal with costume repair and like that kind of thing. So it was kind of cool how his costume gets all shredded, like his mask gets pulled off by Sandman, and he has to go swinging around for a little while until he can get back home to fix it and put on another one. I like the amount of near misses with his secret identity because Aunt May accidentally almost sees the costume in his closet a handful of times. There's also like, Peter Parker gets screwed over by Spider-Man saving the day kind of thing, where he gets reported to his school by like some girl he was on like an assignment with for kind of bailing out as soon as Sandman showed up, and he has to go explain that before he ends up getting like kicked out of school. And now there's like this ticking clock element of he has to catch Sandman and stop him, his like crime spree, but also go clear like the board at his school. And then I just also really love that scene where he gets tied to the train tracks, and like there's that little exchange where Jonah is trying to take pictures of him, like tied up looking like an idiot. And I thought like all of the dialogue in that scene just felt very on brand for both characters. Like they both just sound like Spider-Man and Jonah, even in like a modern comic. And like the little witty retorts and sarcastic remarks just like were really cool to me. Like, and then also at the end of it, I just love how he, you're laughing at that picture.
I'm laughing at the visual, yeah. I'm not laughing at you. I mean,
I know. It's that scene is kind of infamous for that one image of him on the train tracks doing that weird sexy pose as a joke. But then also the episode ends with one of my other favorite Spider-Man things that I think doesn't get enough appreciation, like certain adaptations, is like he outsmarts the villain and just kind of like he doesn't necessarily need to brute force it to beat them. He just comes up with a way to let them beat themselves, essentially, by leading Sandman through like a car wash and then to a construction site where he gets covered in like wet cement, and then the combination of the two basically turns him into a statue. That just kind of reminded me of stories like Nothing Stops the Juggernaut, or like, that early kind of stuff where he's always coming up with a really clever and sly way to beat them without actually having punch his way out. So yeah, I like that episode. I feel like it's a good episode to just represent the whole show. It's just like it has a little bit of everything.
And Sandman is such a good villain to have him outsmart in that way, because otherwise Sandman, he's kind of, punching above his weight and trying to apprehend him. So like he always has to kind of be extra creative there. So yeah.
Mark, what about you? What episode did you choose?
Yeah, well, obviously, Dan, as we talked about in season 3, I'm a big apologist for Marvel. Granted, I'm going to pick a team-up episode. I picked episode 18, which is the capture of Captain America. I'm also kind of a sucker for a Cap story, but like part of the reason why I like this, beyond the fact that I thought it was kind of a really good functional team-up premise, was the fact that we're kind of playing with some classic Spidey predicaments, and that he's basically trying to kind of prove himself to Cap by saving him from this plot from the Red Skull from being captured. And of course, due to Spidey's kind of inadvertent incompetence, Cap gets captured anyway. So then, like, now that Cap has been captured, Peter has to kind of think of a way to both redeem himself, but also like not get his idol killed. We have some, I guess proto Amazing Spider-Man 700 action going on here with the Red Skull trying to swap minds with Captain America. That's kind of the master plot here, where he's going to put, Cap's in Red Skull's body. So, combining, or excuse me, the other way around, putting Red Skull's mind in Cap's body. So basically combining the brilliance of the Red Skull with Cap's, immortal physique and physicality. But Spidey, of course, does find a way to kind of save the day, clumsily, a la another one of my favorite controversial moments of Spider-Man history, kind of throwing himself onto the container to free the Avengers against Thanos in Marvel 2-in-1 Annual #2, one of the most essential issues of Spider-Man of all time, Dan.
Of course.
Changed my mind. Anyway, no. So it's got that classic, the classic Spider-Man elements of success. Kind of in spite of himself, after kind of setting himself, basically failing into success. And also, it's just a fun team-up episode, and it just kind of felt different and unique, especially in the long line of all these Doom episodes. I just liked how, it was probably, of all the guest star episodes, although I'm probably going to offend you, Dan, based on your next choice, I felt it was the best of all, like, kind of the guest starring episodes in terms of a crossover.
I don't disagree with you. I love that Spider-Man has to kind of like dress up as Captain America to thwart everyone. And that's fun whenever Peter kind of has to assume the mantle of somebody else. I enjoyed that a lot about this episode. But yes,
there's just a lot of quirky elements. But what's yours, Dan?
Yeah, you mentioned mine. Mine, I mean, I chose after you. So like you may have grabbed my favorite, but I actually really like the return of Kingpin. It's actually the first Kingpin episode. I guess that he's returning from another show, or he's returning to power. This one is a team up with Spider-Man and Namor, which is not really a team up I'm that fond of. I mean, I think about like the Denny O'Neil run of Spider-Man where Namor and him teamed up, which we talked about on a previous episode. But what I like about this episode is the kind of like psychological element of it, is that like Kingpin is using all of his resources to trick Spider-Man into like thwarting crime, but it's like thwarting crime so that he can benefit off of it. And we kind of saw this in the Ultimate Spider-Man comic. At one point there was a whole arc about this where it's, Spider-Man was kind of torn between stopping crime and aiding the Kingpin. And I like that. Like, I thought that this show was being clever. It also features like fun Kingpin beating up a bunch of goons, which is great. I love his training sequences where he just like has men that whose only job it is for him to pummel. That's a lot of fun, and I love
that's happened before in the comics a bunch, so that was cool.
Yeah, and
it was felt very Daredevil-ish too. Frank Miller Daredevil.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the kind of deep cuts that appear in this episode. There's like a bunch of other rival gang lords, and that's like Hammerhead, Man Mountain Marco makes an appearance, Silvermane, and like really obscurely, Caesar Cicero shows up from the Lifeline tablet issues. And to me, that's like, they don't have any speaking lines. They're just there in the background. And to me, that suggests these creators like really love the comic books, or at least they did their homework.
They did their homework.
Yeah, and that means a lot to me. I really appreciated that. But yeah, that's my pick, is the return of Kingpin. But look, if you want to talk about Spider-Man, we've got a special place for you to do so. Mark, why don't you tell us about this?
Oh boy, yeah. So hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on the Slack. The Amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more.
Yeah, Mark, I'm there all the time. Just this week, we were talking about how disturbing it is that Marvel released a Mary Jane toy with an interchangeable Gwen Stacy head, and... well, I mean, I don't know how you feel about that, but it made for an interesting conversation nevertheless. So, just follow the link in the description and be sure to say hi. Let us know what you thought of the episode if you join us there in our Amazing Spider Slack. But, we're back, and we're going to talk about our next topic, and that is the daunted and I guess like very well remembered Spider-Man and his amazing friends. We're here to talk about we'll be exclusively singing this portion of the show. Yeah. We talked a little bit about this. Mark, tell us a little bit more about the history of this show.
Right. Well, it debuted, again, September 12th, 1981, but this was on NBC's Saturday morning cartoon block. So thus far more exposure. And it was 24. It was just basically the same number of episodes of Spider-Man 81, but they broke it up into 3 seasons, although they're very oddly segmented seasons. Like seasons 1 is episodes 1 through 13, and then season 2 is only 14 through 16, which were the 3 origin episodes. And then the final season, which is episode 17 through 24, they brought in Stan Lee actually to narrate portions of the season. And as you alluded to in the intro, Dan, this was envisioned as a competitor to ABC's Super Friends series, which was kind of the DC Justice League show. It basically runs 81 through 83, and then it ran 3 additional years on NBC as reruns before showing up in that that Marvel action block with Spider-Man 81. I think the Hulk animated series was part of that block too. So, I mean, kind of a similar trajectory, but like this one gained far more traction, and I think being on NBC for essentially 6 years probably had a lot to do with the fact that it's being, far more remembered than the other series.
Mark, you're a little bit older than Xavier and myself. Do you remember watching this on TV when you were a kid, or did you miss this?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I was as old as I am, I didn't see it in the original run, like 81 to 83. I mean, I was 2 in 1983, but like I definitely have memories in like the mid 80s. So figure 85, 86, waking up on a Saturday morning and watching this show. So I couldn't tell you which episodes I saw back then, but I was a total Saturday morning cartoon junkie as a kid that age, and this was part of that block of shows for sure.
Xavier, when did you first kind of was it that VHS tape that first exposed you to this?
Yeah, because it was that VHS tape that was just like a block of a couple episodes. The one that I remember most vividly was the X-Men crossover. But eventually, like, they started airing reruns of this on, like, I think, like, Disney XD or something. Like, there was a TV channel that would start playing a couple of old episodes every once in a while. And, like, I must have been, like, 10 or 11 around that time, so I would occasionally catch them on there and, like, kind of see what the fuss was all about, because I know people were still like, even back then I knew people would reference this show and talk about it, but I had only seen like a little bit of it.
And for me, it was all about that VHS tape. And I always remember being like, okay, I know Iceman, I know Spider-Man, but I have no idea who this Firestar character is.
Yeah.
Mark, what was the deal with this? What's the deal with Firestar?
What's the deal with Firestar? Well, she's not quite.
She's my favorite
Torch.
Teen Titan.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically, it sounds like in terms of friends to pair with Spider-Man, they wanted to do a fire and ice motif, and obviously Johnny Storm would have been the ideal choice. I mean, he was literally like Spider-Man's best frenemy from the comics, but as we alluded to earlier in the show, there were some rights issues, hence Herbie the Robot in that Fantastic Four series, which was run by the same production company. So they decided instead to create an original character, Angelica Jones, Firestar, to be the fire element of the show. And so she was created specifically for this cartoon, but she would eventually make her comics debut in Uncanny X-Men number 193 in 1985. So although I'm not an X-reader, and I'm not going to pin it on you, Xavier, despite your name, but like I don't feel like she's ever been a main character in X-Men, right? I mean, it's just always, she's kind of just popped up from time to time, right?
Even in spite of my name, I don't really read X-Men books either. I just, as far as I know about Firestar in the comics, it's just that Bendis made Liz Allen Firestar in the Ultimate Run.
That was a bizarre choice,
whole,
but
Amazing Friends arc for a little while there in the Ultimate book that I thought was kind of neat.
Yeah, they actually live with Peter and Aunt May, just like in this series, and it becomes a bit of a flop house for young, superpowered people. But yeah, I mean, I kind of like Firestar. She's got a lot of personality about her. I mean, she carries with her a lot of like nasty tropes that, I think we wouldn't see today, obviously, where everybody is hitting on her constantly.
Yeah.
But like,
hey, pretty lady.
Yeah. The design of the costume is neat.
Oh, shush, Flash Thompson.
Yeah. One of the things I like about this show, if we're just talking, kind of broad historical things, it's like, thank God they added more songs to the musical score. I mean, all of our favorites come back, but at least it's broader in its scope this time around.
There's like 4 songs instead of 2.
I'll take it. That brings up the question, like, is this a sequel to the original Spider-Man show? You said earlier, Mark, that you felt like that 1981 Spider-Man show is more of a sequel to the 60s show than this was to the 81 show. Like, where do those discrepancies lie for you?
Well, I mean, there's a few. I mean, talking specifically from the plot, like, and there are other people on the internet who have theorized about this, but like, one of the things that people like to point out, like, is this a sequel? Is it a companion show? Whatever. If you look at the Red Skull and Dr. Doom, who both show up in this, I mean, in Spider-Man 81, those characters are kind of left for dead by the end of their appearances. Doom at the end of his arc, and then the Red Skull in that episode with Captain America that we talked about earlier, and they show up here pretty much alive and unchecked. However, it seems like Magneto, when he shows up here, kind of alludes to the Spider-Man 81 episode that he shows up in. So, I mean, a little, there's a little bit of inconsistency, but just in general, like these shows are essentially concurrently produced shows, and like, never at any point does like Spider-Man kind of allude to his life without Firestar and Iceman. Like, hey, I'm also having adventures on my own, guys. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like, no, we're a team, and
it had to have taken place before them.
Yeah. It's just kind of it just feels like they're very independently staged, and it just so happens that they were released around the same time with the same production company with similar sounding scores and animation styles. But like, I don't.
Yeah, because like Peter, Eddie, like both are. If I'm not mistaken, it's pretty much the same design across both shows. Like I think they might have used the same like model sheets or whatever. but like where he lives with Aunt May is different. Aunt May, I think, has a design change. Like Jonah doesn't necessarily have the same look. Like for some reason, he's like the only character I remember being very like explicitly the same across both shows. Everyone else has like little. So
well, the voices are all different. Even Spider-Man's voice, Dan Gilvazian.
Yeah,
I mean, he's totally
why
different.
Even recast? He was the first guy was so good.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I like Dan Gilvazian is because his name is so similar to mine that I get mistaken for him in the Spider-Man community every now and again. But yeah, I mean, that feels like a real step down for me. The voice acting is just not as good.
Oh, for sure. And like, I forgot his name. The guy who plays Fred and Scooby-Doo a lot and is Iceman in this. Either chime in, please help me remember his name.
I don't know it.
You're good with names.
Yeah.
Oh, no!
I know. I don't have it, but
he plays like a substantial
I could live stream on IMDb. Hold on.
All right, yeah, let's do it.
Okay, this is great. Guys, talk amongst yourselves while I search.
Okay, but anyway, yeah, a lot of the characters are very clearly just that same voice, like Flash Thompson and Shocker and
Frank Welker.
Like a lot of random Frank Welker, that's what it is. I feel like an idiot for not remembering that. Like he's still working today. He's so prolific. But yeah, it became distracting how many reused voices there were. I think even at some point during that X-Men crossover episode, had the same voice as Spider-Man, and like whoever voiced like Nightcrawler sounded like three other characters. Like they really didn't have a big cast to work with, and it kind of takes you out of the moment a little when two characters sound exactly the same and are talking to each other.
And I still don't quite get what they were going for with Wolverine and his voice. Is he trying to be like Gambit? I don't get it.
It's two different cartoons around that time where Wolverine was Australian for no reason, because there's also the pilot episode of that X-Men show that never took off, Pride of the X-Men. He was Australian in that too. I don't know what the connection is there. Maybe we should look into that sometime.
Well, okay. You guys are
Canadian and Australian. I mean, right?
Nah, basically the same thing, you know?
Yeah, right?
And you guys are kind of like...
Not even the same hemisphere.
You guys are like floating around the
They both got koalas, whatever.
You guys are floating around the bigger point, which is that like the cast in this show was enormous compared to the Spider-Man 81 show, because every show was like 20 new cast members because of how broad this show gets into the Marvel Universe. And let's just talk about our general thoughts on the show, and I'll just get right to it, which is like, I think this show is insane. I think it is completely bonkers.
Yeah. You're stealing my word, Dan, because bonkers, this is the word that keeps coming back to me. This show is totally nuts. It makes no sense. It's like, I mean, like, as much as comics don't make sense, like I literally like hurt myself trying to actually do the mental gymnastics it takes for me to kind of figure many elements of this show out. But I mean, maybe I'm just being unfair to it.
Yeah, this one definitely feels like a lot more superhero cartoons around the time. Well, as 81 felt much like just a direct adaptation. Here's what Spider-Man is. This is just like those types of shows where it's like it's character and like a little bit of their lore thrown in, but then just a lot of crazy other stuff that they shouldn't be doing, like falling in love with space aliens and time traveling and whatever. Like it's just off the wall, because I think maybe they thought that would be more toyetic. You could get more stuff to turn into like products that way if you weren't just directly going for Spider-Man-esque stories.
Yeah, and it also just plays into the fact, I mean, like, as a Saturday morning cartoon, I mean, like, you kind of, like, have to be over the top. I mean, think about, like, all the other shows that were on at this time. I mean, like, it's, I think, a straight-up superhero adaptation for the 80s, which is, like, an 80s cartoon would not work. Like, this, I mean, this is, like, it's fanciful, it's crazy.
Well, Spider-Man 81 kind of proved to us, because that it didn't catch on. Like it did the job that we're looking for as fans of the character, but like
Yeah.
it wasn't that thing that was going to catch on and become like a sensation like they were hoping for.
Yeah, because I feel like the holes that we see in it and like the logical fallacies that we see in it, we're only seeing it because our point of comparison are the comics. But if like you're just some kid coming to this fresh being like, oh man, like Spider-Man's awesome, I love Iceman's awesome, I love these things, like they're, you know, again, they're not carrying that like
those kids are just coming off of like Johnny Quest and that kind of thing.
Yeah, like the fact that they have this secret lair that like kind of turns inside and outside in Aunt May's house, like what
just
the
so
hell?
Play set ready, the most like, oh boy, if I don't know for sure because I never had it because I grew up way after the show, but I absolutely could see that being like one of those like playset gimmick things where it's like oh look, it's their goofy college student apartment, but you pull this lever and suddenly everything flips around, and then like it's missing bat poles almost is how close it is to something like that.
Yeah, definitely Batman-esque for sure. And you know, again, like we're sitting here like arguing about it because like, oh, that would in the comics like Peter would never be able to hide something that sophisticated in Aunt May's house.
Never be able to afford it. That's another thing is because in the episode I wanted to talk about, there's an intro from Stan Lee going, we've been hearing your questions. We want to answer this for you. How could all these college students who rarely have money afford all of this high-tech equipment? Well, we're going to answer your question for you. Like, I think people even back then were starting to question it a little bit for them to have to write that into the narration.
Right.
I could see that being like a big fan mail, like contention thing. Like, how the hell is all this coming together?
Or maybe this was just like Stan Lee, like watching the cartoon for the first time and being like, wait, what happened? No.
Because sometimes he would meddle like
questions.
that. He would be like, that's not how that's supposed to look or work. Or like, maybe it was some executive meddling on his part, and he actually kind of tried to improve the show, which I honestly don't have a problem with because, you know, I think his input was valuable.
I feel like the contemporary for this show in terms of modern shows to compare it to is probably the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon. It feels like oftentimes that like this show is more interested in exploring the rest of the Marvel Universe through the eyes of Spider-Man. Like we get very little of Peter Parker's life in this other than handling how he hides all this from Aunt May, which is just by tugging on a statue. But, you know, there are full episodes where like Spider-Man does almost next to nothing. Like there's one with Thor where he's trapped inside of like a gem and that's it, you know, and it's a Thor story where Thor is fighting a cloned Thor, which is actually Loki. You know, it's got that kind of like Marvel team up crazy plots from the comics, but in terms of cartoon shows, it really feels like that Ultimate Spider-Man show.
And yet the origin episode for Peter, because they do 3 different origin episodes. We'll talk a little bit more about one of them in a bit, but like the Peter one is just, I mean, like not even like literally Amazing Fantasy 15. I mean, it's just like almost page for page.
I also noticed, I think that episode had like a higher budget than a lot of the other ones because something about it just looks a lot more just modern and professional. Like it looked more like the 90s cartoon. There was like actual shading on the cell animation. The backgrounds were more detailed and had like a sort of grit to them. Like it wasn't as bright and poppy and colorful. Like it had sort of a visual style that for some reason that episode just doesn't look like a lot of the other ones I remember.
Yeah, it was just totally jarring for me considering how off the wall everything else about the show is, that they do this, you know, this origin episode for Peter and you're like, oh wow, this is like straight out of the comics. That's impressive.
That's kind of what it felt like with the 60s cartoon. Is just like, here's a lot of, you know, crazy, random, weird, whatever we can come up with, like reused animation from other shows, even in some cases. And then here's in mid or like season 2 openers. Here's just a direct adaptation of the origin, just in case you didn't know what it was. And like between the two of them, I prefer the Amazing Friends version actually, because I also like that they kind of frame like a picture around it.
Yeah. But now here's a question. Here's another like logic question I have. So contractually, how do things actually work with Iceman and Firestar and Spider-Man? Because like they also established in the show that Iceman and Firestar are also X-Men. but it's like they are basically never part of the X team in this show, other than when the episodes where they need to do the
Firestar says we're X-Men during the episode where they get together. She makes like a pun about it. So
it just doesn't. It doesn't seem. And then and they're living with Peter full time. So yeah, I don't know. Like it didn't fully click for me that that they were truly fully divorced. Because I don't know. I mean, it just seemed weird to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like they say X-Men, like they're not part of them anymore, but they still hang out with them constantly. I don't know. I didn't watch the entirety of the show. Just I just kind of cherry picked episodes that seemed interesting. Just because of time constraints, but I don't think at any point I ever saw them explain necessarily why they left the X-Men or what was going on with that. So
yeah, it's never explained.
That's just something I missed.
One of the things that always bothers me about the show is this really weird love triangle that's going on where Peter and Bobby are kind of competing for Firestar's affection, and Firestar has her own kind of sex life that she's got going on where she's dating other men and making them jealous. At one point she dates Dracula, but like you do, but it's always been very skeevy to me.
Crazy, but I think Iceman was maybe just putting on a front.
Yeah, right. No,
I wonder. That new context kind of informs a lot of older stuff about Iceman. In the X-Men Legends game, he says flirty things about girls every 10 seconds, and it's you're trying too hard, Bobby.
Yeah. And I also hate to say it too, but I feel especially in the first few episodes, Angelica definitely comes across as, and God, this just saying the term makes me kind of want to cringe, but there's definitely Mary Sue qualities to her. In terms of that first episode, that Green Goblin one, it's Bobby and Peter are basically getting into all sorts of trouble, and it's well, here comes Angelica to just solve all the problems, and it's whoa. But I feel they do kind of temper that as the show goes on. I mean, she gets into her own issues where she needs to be bailed out, and they kind of all. I mean, if anything, Spider-Man kind of comes out as the alpha of the group, but for the most part, I feel they all kind of play off each other, which is technically a good thing, I would say, in terms of a team-up show. You do want to see them all kind of working together and aiding each other for the most part.
We have to talk about Firestar's pet, Miss Lion, who is a key member of the cast and defeats supervillains in an episode or two. So Firestar has a pet dog, Miss Lion, and it must have been an executive note somewhere that said, we need an animal or a dog at the heart of this show.
Yeah, talking cartoon sidekick dog.
Yeah.
That was a ripoff of Wonder Dog, I think, from Super Friends. I mean, this was in terms of the Saturday morning superhero cartoon wars. Apparently, Miss Lion is a straight up ape of Wonder Dog. And my understanding.
That whole archetype you could even kind of trace back to Scooby-Doo fame, because there was a lot of Hanna-Barbera kind of knockoffs trying to get in on that fame. So a group of teenagers with dog sidekick, And it just seems very derivative of a lot of things.
In the comic, in Spider-Verse, when we visit the Amazing Friends universe, they're all killed. All of these characters are killed officially by Dan Slott, except for Miss Lion, who stands over their dead bodies and howls. Because that's the kind of good Saturday morning fun that you want. Yes, canonically, all these characters are dead.
Is you don't have the vocabulary to describe the murder I've just done, because this is a universe where death doesn't exist.
No, definitely not.
God, I'm glad that they eventually went back and then said, just to kind of quell the anger, is that, okay, all of those were not the actual universe of the cartoons, just one adjacent or close enough. The actual Amazing Spider-Man or Amazing Friends and Spider-Man Unlimited, all those guys are still around somewhere.
So then the other thing I thought was kind of weird with this show, Dan, was we got far less Jonah, right? Am I misremembering this? I mean, I just binged it, so maybe the shows are blurring together, but I don't feel we got a lot of Jonah. I don't think we got any Betty or Right. But the Bugle itself, I mean, it's a character, but it's not obviously as prominent as what we saw in Spider-Man 81, which I thought was a little unfortunate.
Yeah, he only shows up in one episode, which is this one, Spider-Man Unmasked, with Sandman. And, Sandman finds out Peter's identity and kind of uses it to wreak havoc on him, and that incorporates Jonah. But yeah, it's really weird. He just disappears. Like, it's like they got an studio executive note that said nobody likes Jonah.
In the episode for how they got together, he has like a brief little thing in that where he's like, "Hey, I got those pictures of Spider-Man," and Jonah's like, "No, people want pictures of Firestar and Iceman."
Yeah, that's right. I remember that. Yeah, it
was weird that his mustache was like the color of like his temples, like it was white instead of black in that scene.
Yeah, it seems like a coloring error. I noticed that too. Yeah, I mean, it's like like I said, they got like in a note that said nobody likes Jonah, so get rid of him, and that's what happened, I guess. I like him too.
Yeah, who would possibly give that note? Everybody loves Jonah.
Nobody? Who says that?
It's apparently like Mark Webb and Amazing Spider-Man movies, I guess. Like maybe it's the same production team. I don't know.
Maybe Stan spiked it just because he wanted to do the voice of him.
There you go.
My headcanon, by the way, for the Amazing Spider-Man movies is that J. Jonah Jameson is also played by J.K. Simmons in there. You just don't get to see him.
Makes sense to me. So let's talk about some of our favorite or notable episodes from this run. I'm going to start it off because we're going to go sequentially, and I chose 2, so I'm cheating. But I'm just going to do it because like they're both so weird. I thought that like I have to talk about how weird these episodes are because frankly, Mark, I'm surprised you didn't choose one of these episodes. So the first one I'm talking about is the, episode 3, which is The Fantastic Mr. Frump. And this, I'll talk briefly about this episode. There is like, it's a Dr. Doom Spider-Man story. And one of the few from Amazing Friends, maybe they felt like they overused him in the Spider-Man show, where Dr. Doom gets this like amulet that gives him basically the power of like the Infinity Stones. And he like just gets it knocked out of his hands because of course, if you have something that powerful, it's easy to lose. And it goes to this random guy that used to work with like Aunt May named Mr. Frump. And he's this like, another balding character. So I'm destined to talk about those. And he gets the powers of God essentially. And he's just this like persnickety old man. And he uses it to basically like transform the city into like a wonderland. He like has these kids that are bullying him, and he like basically turns the kids into animals and slaves, which is interesting. And he turns like he can summon animals and creatures out of nowhere. There's a famous moment where he summons a cat for himself, and he says, "I'll call him Mabel." And then it cuts to commercials. Like that was a big cliffhanger. Like, oh, what was he going to name the cat?
Dun, 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 dun.
I'll call him Mabel. So there you go. And eventually it turns into this like battle in this big arena in like, I don't know, like beyond the Beyonders realm. And Spider-Man is like fighting against like a giant tentacle monster, like something straight out of Spider-Man Hooky. It's like so weird. You're like, what is this show? And I remember watching this, and I will admit, I loved the Spider-Man 1981 show, but in terms of binging, this show was way better because I never knew where it was going. Each of these episodes feels like it was just a team of improv comedians just making stuff up from second to second. It's so strange. So that's episode 3, The Fantastic Mr. Frump. There was less of
like a recurring structure for the episodes.
Yeah, it's just all over the place. And you never know, like, minute to minute, what bizarre new kind of, like, thing they're going to throw out there for you to digest. So that's The Fantastic Mr. Frump.
And speaking of bizarre, what's your other episode?
Yeah, my other episode is, of course, it's Swarm. Favorite of our show, Swarm. And Swarm in this episode,
Nazi skeletons covered in bees.
So this one, he's not actually a Nazi skeleton in this one. He's just like a meteorite crash lands, and radioactively.
Sorry, kids, we can't do Nazis.
Yeah, right.
Red Skull is there.
I guess that's true, but he's technically is Red Skull a Nazi?
Yeah,
maybe
they got some complaints.
Maybe
they got complaints about being too political about Nazis.
Yeah, right. There you go. Inside joke. But yes, these bees come and they are formed into Swarm, who at first seems to only be able to say his name, and he flies across the farmlands shouting Swarm at people. And in this, he has a very unique ability. He can transform human beings into like bee human hybrids that he controls, including Aunt May, who spouts antenna and grows bee eyes. And he, of course, like Swarm is wont to do, summons a giant beehive in the middle of like the countryside. And it's up to Spider-Man and his spider friends to pretend that they're bee people and go into the hive and grab the meteor and destroy the radioactive bees that are Swarm. And to me, the highlight of the episode is them disguising themselves as bees. Iceman grows ice wings out of his back, and Spider-Man puts fake bee eyes over his already insect eyes. So it's like if you were wearing glasses, you put on another pair of glasses. Yeah, it's very odd. So that is the Swarm episode. And, you know, if you're looking just for weird episodes to check out on Disney Plus, like that's episode 3 and 5, you really can't go wrong. They are every minute something stranger and stranger is happening. So those are my picks because that's the love I got out of the show is just where is it going next? So, Mark, the episode you're going to talk, we've kind of talked about a little bit before. Tell us about which one you chose.
Yeah, this one's far less weird. I picked A Firestar is Born, which I guess is technically from season 2, episode 3. It's one of the origin shows that I alluded to earlier. Part of the reason why I liked this so much when I was watching it for the first time the other day, I was like, oh man, this is like OG Spidey versus Juggernaut. Of course, the X factor into the storyline where, of course, in the comics, you know, Spider-Man was on his own, but like, you know, it's very similar in structure to that Roger Stern story in that, you know, Spidey's literally throwing everything he can, although he even throws cement at him, like a cement pit at him, and he gets out of that. So take that, Roger Stern. You thought that would be what foiled him. But beyond that, we get Firestar's origin. And while it is very, I feel, Stephen King Carrie-esque in terms of like, you know, trying to bully the girl in high school with the weird powers. It's a pretty solid origin, although like I feel like they're setting it up to be far more tragic than it turns out to be. I mean, it's like basically like there's this girl in high school who's just like utterly bullying the crap out of Angelica, and you know, rather than like basically like pushing her into full-on outcast territory, which would explain how she joined up with the X-Men, it's like, you know, she still finds a way to kind of, Angelica still finds a way to kind of come out on top and absolve her name, and then she just joins the X-Men anyway. So like that's a bit of a cheat to me. I mean, like I feel like if this wasn't a Saturday morning like kids cartoon, they probably would have gone the darker route and, you know, like forced her out in kind of a more sinister way. But beyond that, like, we get a cool X-Men team up. We get a good Juggernaut Spider-Man fight here. We got Australian Wolverine, which, I mean, like, you can't get better than that, clearly. You get Storm, and then, like, finally, like, them, like, ogling another woman in this show besides Angelica, which is kind of refreshing, I guess, that, you know, it's equal opportunity, chauvinism. So there you go. I mean, like to me, and a pun on, you know, a famous movie. So what's better than that? Firestar is Born. My recommendation. So
apparently the stream just went down because of policy violations. So Xavier, you were right. They do not like us showing this particular episode.
Oh, really?
So, yes, apparently.
Did it get shut down in like all places?
I don't know. Let's check really quickly here. Sorry if anybody's watching this. We're gonna go see what's going on with the stream.
What about the people who are seeing the stream on my channel?
Yeah, I don't know. Let's see. I don't know if anybody has said that yet. It says live now. Let me see. It's down on mine.
The one on my channel, it looks like it's still up.
Okay, well we'll keep going then, and we'll figure it out. So that's not the Juggernaut episode. Xavier, do you want to quickly talk about yours?
I hope I don't get in trouble for having footage from that episode.
Oh no.
Yeah. Okay. The episode that I picked for the one that I liked was just the origin of the Spider Friends, because like I don't know, a lot of the weirder elements of the show don't kind of gel with me as well. Like I don't really like it in the ironic sense as much, or the like just seeing how weird it gets. I was kind of looking for more stuff from like 81 Spider-Man, so the fact that this felt very Peter Parker oriented, like he was kind of the main character, and you know they took like a really heavy backseat. Like sure they're introduced and team up with him, but they don't feel necessarily like they're kind of impeding on the Spider-Man-ness of this episode, or like kind of imposing. And also really appreciate that, like, you know, the villain is the Beetle. Okay, hang on, actually, just 1 second.
It's down on both of ours now.
Apparently, it actually looks like it. Yeah, it got shut down on YouTube as well.
All right. Well, okay. I apologize, Xavier.
Uh-oh.
Do you want to just finish it up and then we'll put a stop?
Yeah, I suppose so. That sucks. I was a little worried about that.
Yeah, you were right. You were right. Look at that. It's still going on Facebook. We're not going to be able to get it back up.
Okay.
So we'll just finish up for the recording, and then I'll edit these out.
But I get like a strike for that.
I'll edit these out and send a different version to everybody.
Okay.
So finish up, I guess, saying what you were saying, and we'll figure it out.
Putting up footage.
It's weird because it's up. Yeah.
That particular episode, I just liked how, I don't know, it reminded me the most of the 81 show, and I was kind of just looking for more of that since I like that one a lot. And all of the weird, like, other superhero stuff in the universe, like Men or Iron Man's inclusion, they all just felt very toned down and not intrusive. So, like, you know, if you're looking for an episode that's, like, kind of not as bizarre as all the rest of them and like feels pretty typical of Spider-Man stuff, I think that one's probably the one to go with.
Yeah, it's a great choice. It's a lot of fun too, and even though the Beetle is an atypical villain, it's neat to see, like, you know, the kind of heavy character oriented scripting that this show, I think, leaned far away from, kind of take the precedence here.
Yeah.
Xavier, do you want to take a pause?
He's voiced by Starscream. Take a pause.
I don't know. I just don't know if you are having anxiety about it, but it is down. So, or do you just want to finish up?
Whichever you guys want to do.
I guess let's just finish up and then we'll figure it out. I'm sorry, Xavier. I feel bad about this.
It's no problem. It's I mean, I was paranoid about it, but for good reason.
Yeah, no, you were right. You were right.
Because I mean, I've done enough videos with copyrighted footage to know that YouTube is very fun, very kind of bratty about what it wants to do, you know, say is okay and what isn't for that kind of thing.
Yeah. All right, well, let's finish up. Sorry, there are people probably watching on other streams that are like, what the hell is happening right now? So sorry, everybody that's watching.
That's okay.
Okay, well, let's thank you for, it's a great choice of an episode, Xavier, and a lot of fun. So, you know, guys, I know we're down right now, but if you find this show entertaining and valuable, please consider supporting us. Recommend Amazing Spider Talk to a friend, and if you're able, become a member on Patreon.
We can only bring you this content with the support of our Patreon members, and we owe the show's success to every single one of them. And we are constantly making exclusive content for our members. This week, it's a special podcast review of Amazing Spider-Man Volume 5, number 43. Marvel Comics are back, baby. Also, Dan and I are hosting interactive members-only live streams as well.
you know, comic releases are limited right now, so why not take that $3.99 you might have spent on a comic and put it towards a month subscription to support the show and start receiving our Patreon content. And when all the comic stores open back up again, the distribution chain gets sorted out, and you can pick up your copious pulls, you'll hear our Patreon-exclusive review podcast on every new issue of Amazing Spider-Man the same week that it comes out.
And if you contribute $10 a month, you gain access to exclusive artwork from famous Spider-Man artists commissioned exclusively for our members. This season, we'll be mailing out a print of Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut, drawn by official Marvel artist Max Fiamora in colors and inks. Plus, every episode, we release a new episode-specific desktop background created for us by artist Nick Cagnetti for our patrons to enjoy.
We know this is a hard time for everybody, so we appreciate anyone who supports the show just by listening and sharing. But if you do have the means, please join us on Patreon to support our continued existence of our show. Just follow the link in the description. And thank you to all the members who already make this show possible.
But alas, Dan, it is that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to the episodes of the Amazing Spider Talk. And, of course, thanks to you, Xavier Mendoza, for stopping by and hanging out with us and talking about these cool cartoons.
Well, of course. It was a good time. Little technical glitches aside, I had a great time, and it was nice talking to you guys.
So where can we find you on YouTube, Xavier?
GodzillaMendoza. If you just look up Spider-Man video games, I'll probably be one of the first results. Again, if just the kind of thing that I make over there is game reviews, reviews of like animated shows, usually based around like comics, and the occasional cosplay tutorial. If any of that sounds interesting, then go give me a look. But right now, I'm doing a lot more cartoon-based stuff, kind of like this. So I'm actually going to review both the 81 show and Amazing Friends, and more of I can kind of script out my thoughts a little bit more, and write probably some funnier jokes towards those, and that'll be coming out in the next couple of months.
And you've got a bunch of videos, like one about Dan Slott's run on comics that like maybe a little controversial, but I thought really made an excellent point about storytelling in comics and stuff, and comparing his run to Nick Spencer's. And if you're a listener of ours, I know you'll really dig that episode of your show.
Yes, it's how Nick Spencer redeemed Spider-Man. I wrote it right around the time that arc first started, because I was really digging what they were doing with it at the time.
Yeah, it's really great. So thanks again, Xavier.
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun having you on.
No problem.
And so this episode obviously was edited by Rick Coast with production support from Andy Myers. Our artwork comes handcrafted by artists Ron Friend, Sal Buscema, Ray Sumser, and Nick Cagnetti. And our theme songs were produced by Rylan Bojack and Spider-Man.
Would you look at that? It looks like it's actually back on the other.
Oh, wow.
Sorry. I was just saying that the screen came back.
And our animated introduction was created by Josh Sutton of the Panels to Pixels YouTube show. It's up again?
Yeah. It's up on my channel at least.
Well, there you go. Welcome back, everybody.
So
live streaming, everybody. Welcome to the Thunderdome.
We got the strike.
Maybe it's because we stopped showing the footage from the episode.
Yeah, I guess that's it. So don't show footage from Amazing Friends, everybody. But we're coming to the end of the show. We're thanking Xavier for coming on, which we're wont to do. But let's talk about like what's coming up next.
What is coming up next, Dan?
Well, actually, I can't wait for our next episode because, we're going to be joined by another special guest. This time it's Spider-Man editor Danny Fingeroth. And Danny is going to be joining us to talk about all the superstar artists who work on the Spider-Man books across this time period of the late 70s and early 80s, who would go on to become more legendary in the industry. People like Frank Miller, John Romita Jr., and many more. So it's going to be a really fun episode as we talk about like a bunch of really awesome artists with a famous Spider-Man editor. So, join us. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so if you missed out on our live stream or even missed out on the missing 5 minutes of our live stream tonight, be sure to check in on us in 2 weeks. And don't forget, as soon as the show ends, the conversation continues with our audience on YouTube. Don't worry, this is still a podcast that will always remain consistent, just like how we end the show. So until Mortimer Jameson becomes the Daily Bugle's lead photographer, what is our motto, Xavier?
With great podcasts, there must also come, ellipses, the amazing Spider Talk.
And that's the end of the show, everybody. Thanks for hanging around despite all the technical glitches. We're going to be answering some of your questions, so head on over to our chat and ask questions of any of us about the show, about Spider-Man. We'll answer like 2 or 3 of them before we move on to our Patreon exclusive content. So, thank you for tuning in. This was a lot of fun. Let's get some questions going here. Let's see. Questions.
Just waiting.
Just waiting on questions. There's a little bit of a delay.
I'm sure that some are coming along.
Mark, do you have any questions for Xavier?
I'm not on
Xavier, do you have a favorite run of Spider-Man comics?
Honestly, I was just a big fan of everything in the 80s. I don't know if this is like an unpopular opinion, but I kind of like the fact that the creative team kept changing from like every couple of issues, so that it was always keeping it kind of like new and unique and fresh. We're talking just like a single writer than either Paul Jenkins or Straczynski, minus a few little blemishes on the good.
Sure. We're having some technical issues here with Godzilla's or Xavier's video image here, but yeah, it looks like there's something weird going on. Boy, we were doing so good for such a long time, and now it's like crazy town.
I feel a little cursed, man. It's whenever I'm live streaming, there's always got to be.
So we can still hear you, so that's fine. So you think the '80s show? or '80s series? That's the one. Of Amazing Spider-Man.
Of like, just like comics? Yeah, my favorite era is probably just the whole 80s kind of like stretch of books. Like post Gwen Stacy, I feel like is like just that whole stretch is just all good stuff in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed. Somebody's asking, Xavier, are there any comics that you collect?
That I collect. I've been collecting the Donny Cates Venom run. I have a lot of issues of Ultimate Spider-Man like that as much as I used to, but I still have them. I try to collect all of the Garth Ennis run of Punisher Max, because that's one of my favorites. Then lately, I've just been getting a collection of embarrassing storyline of Spider-Man, because my friend from Florida keeps finding them and then mailing them to me. So Trouble, both on hardcover and individual issues, and I have the Power Pack issue. Like, and he finds something weird, he sends it to me. So I guess I just have all the ones that everyone wants to forget about too.
The Power Pack issue, I searched for that for years, and I would go to conventions and be like, do you have this issue? And people would be like, what are you talking about? And, I would explain the whole,
I have a copy of it.
Yeah, I have one too, but it took me a long time to actually find one.
I wasn't even looking funny.
I found it in a dollar bin. Go figure.
I mean, it didn't cost me much. It's just one of those things. It's like, who's holding on to this? It's such a strange issue. But yeah. Tim Burns is asking, I noticed the odd way they pronounced Khazar in the Craven episode in the 1981 show. Since comics are a print medium, are there any other things you've seen like that when translating from print to TV? Can you guys think of anything where it's like suddenly they're botching the name?
What about like Thanos? Is it Thanos or
the 90s cartoon had no idea how to pronounce symbiote.
Yeah.
The symbiote.
Well, neither did the Venom movie if you watch the trailer.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad that they went back and like fixed that. I don't know if they like ADR'd it or something, but
yeah, it's really, really strange. Okay, let's get one more question, and then we'll figure out what's going on with Xavier's crazy video stuff. If you three could come up with a better title for Venom 2, which is Venom, what is it, Let There Be Carnage? What would it be?
Yeah.
I still haven't seen the first Venom, so I can't answer this one.
I appreciate this unique that movie, because if they called it Maximum Carnage, that would just be confusing, because then I would be like, oh yeah, I was just I was thinking about this one thing from Maximum Carnage, and then people could go comic, the game, or the movie, like naming storylines or naming movies after storylines they only are like vaguely related to, like Civil War or
Infinity War.
Infinity War. I like a special, unique name, so it's you don't have to figure it out. It's just or even Age of Ultron. The Age of Ultron has nothing to do with what they did with the movie.
I'd be down for Venom Tea Time with Carnage. That sounds good to me.
I would say why.
Why?
Yeah, okay, great. So before our tech completely crashes, thank you guys for tuning in. If you want to join us for more of these shows, check out the Amazing Spider Talk channel and the GodzillaMendoza YouTube channel. Hopefully next time we do one of these, Xavier, we were doing so good for so long, but maybe we flew too close to the sun.
Yeah. I see, my camera seems to be just, flickering different colors now. I don't even know what's going on with that.
All right,
but
we'll do it live. Have a good night, everybody. Stay safe and all that.
See you around, everyone.
Bye.
2 men who know the angles, uncover and untangle all the questions and the webs left out to tangle. I'll be in 1962, last Wednesday's afternoon. They'll bend your ears with reckless self-abandon. The Amazing Spider Talk. The Amazing Spider